Welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. This week we continue our look at the Beach Boys' 1965 album Summer Days and Summer Nights with Side 2. Of course, Side 2 kicks off with what has arguably become the defining Beach Boys song, California Girls. Along with a few other records like Hey Jude and the Beach Boys' own Good Vibrations, California Girls is one of those records we've heard so many times over the years that it can be hard to hear it with fresh ears and really take in what a great record it is. For me, and I think for a lot of people, the part that never fails is the beautiful intro. It's got a warm yet symphonic feel and is pure bliss. Brian has said the intro is his favorite piece of music that he's ever written. In the early 80s, when the Beach Boys would play in the Detroit area, usually sometime in late May, they would generally open with California Girls. Apart from being a great concert opener, in my mind, hearing that intro meant that summer was officially arriving at that very moment. Those opening bars give way to what Brian described as sounding like music from a cowboy movie as the heroes riding into town before finally reaching the song itself. Of course, the opening verse brings the entire country into the song, the same way they'd done with If Everybody Had an Ocean in Surfin' USA, and by name-checking amusement parks from all over the country on side 1 of the album. The backing vocals, of course, are phenomenal with some great falsetto from Brian. Famously, the California Girls session was the first Beach Boys session to include Bruce Johnston, and of course he can be clearly heard on the choruses with I Wish They All Could Be California. And let's not forget, it's one of Mike's greatest lead vocals, too. If ever there was an obvious single A-side, this is it, and it's released as a single on July 12, 1965, 1 week after the album. Capitol issued it in a picture sleeve with black and white photos taken on the Beach Boys' European tour in November 1964. You can spot the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church in West Berlin in the background on the B side of the picture sleeve. The A-side shows them at a Parisian cafe with the guys seated, apart from Dennis, who seems to be approaching a female passerby. It's a photo that has been heavily retouched and edited. The woman in front of Dennis has been given dark glasses and bigger hair and possibly an entirely new head. A woman behind them has been removed completely. A male onlooker at the cafe has been given more hair and a beard. Clearly, Capitol wanted to disguise the faces of any members of the public appearing in the photo. Everybody else in the photo is facing the other way. I'm kind of surprised they went to so much trouble. It doesn't strike me as being that good a photo anyway. It seems like they could have just grabbed something else. The single will spend 2 weeks at number 3 beginning August 28th, behind Sonny and Cher's I Got You Babe and the Beatles' Help at 1 and 2 in the first week, and Help and Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone at 1 and 2 in the second week. Admittedly, that's a pretty competitive chart. Though it won't reach number 1 like I Get Around or Help Me Rhonda, California Girls is probably the Beach Boys' defining tune and the song most people are likely to come up with first if you ask them to name a Beach Boys song. It's also one of the great records in the history of recorded music. Next up is the Burt Bacharach-influenced Let Him Run Wild. It's a highlight of this album and the clearest link on this album between side 2 of Today and the coming Pet Sounds. We'll get an alternate version in 1990 on the Today Summer Days 2 CD. Like the alternate versions of Little Honda and Don't Back Down, also from the 2 series, it features more elaborate backing vocals on the choruses. Like those 2 tracks, the alternate version is interesting, but I much prefer the released arrangement. Kind of inexplicably, to me anyway, is that while he had high praise for the song and for everyone else's performance on it, Brian really hated his lead vocal on this, calling it crapped out and screechy. Brian will re-record it for Imagination in 1998. The lead vocal is certainly more understated and it works fine, but for me it lacks the passion of the original, which I much prefer. Let Him Run Wild is a great track, and along with California Girls, one of the strongest selections on the album. Next up is You're So Good to Me. Brian says he wrote it when he was in Hawaii, and it was one that came fast, taking about 20 minutes to write. The 4/4 beat is kind of slamming for a Beach Boys record. Brian sings the verses with no backing vocal, giving it a bit more of a contemporary rock feel like Girl Don't Tell Me. It's another one apparently played entirely by the group, apart from some tambourine by Ron Swallow. I'm guessing this is one of the tracks Brian was thinking of when he called it their best rock and roll record. The refrain, "You're my baby, oh yeah, don't mean maybe, oh yeah," is not the strongest Beach Boys lyric, but the focus of the chorus is more on the unusual la 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 backing vocal. Brian later called it a tongue song. Al recalls his tongue seizing up while they were trying to sing it, and everybody falling into hysterical laughter around the microphone. I've always wondered if maybe the chorus inspired the tit 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 vocal in the middle eight of Girl on the Beach Boys' Rubber Soul, released 5 months later. It's another solid track and one I always enjoy. Following that is Summer Means New Love, another beautiful Brian Wilson instrumental. It continues the wistful, melancholy feel Brian charted in After the Game, his B-side for the Survivors' Pamela Jean. That recording was pretty simple. Summer Means New Love is much more polished with an almost orchestral sound. Brian even called it a little symphony. In his note on the back cover, Carl says it has a relatively light sound. In hindsight, it gives us a preview of the kind of outstanding instrumentals we'll get next year on Pet Sounds. As I've mentioned before, for somebody so associated with vocal harmonies, it's kind of surprising what highlights Brian Wilson's instrumentals are. And this is one of his best. In a complete change of pace, next up is I'm Bugged at My Old Man. Famously, Brian lists himself as too embarrassed to take credit as lead singer on this. When Brian thought about teen experiences as subject matter for the album, it's not surprising that parental conflict came to mind. As David Marks pointed out in The Lost Beach Boy, it wasn't unusual back in those days for guys to talk about how tough their old man was and how rough they have it, kind of like Monty Python's Four Yorkshiremen. Against a simple Fats Domino style piano backing, Brian takes it to absurd levels. And I remember being really cracked up by the final line, "and he doesn't even know where it's at," because it seemed like such a perfect yet utterly ineffective teen putdown. It sounds like it could have come from a mid-60s issue of Mad Magazine with an illustration of a wild-eyed teen by Jack Davis. Actually, it's one of Brian's more effective attempts to bring humor to music. The fact it sounds so spontaneous and off the cuff helps. Of course, humor is also a classic defense mechanism, and no Beach Boys fan can listen to this song today without thinking of Brian's own relationship with his father, Murray. The only other Beach Boys on the track are Dennis and Carl, along with Marilyn on backing vocals, and of course, they would have known exactly where Brian was coming from. It's easy to get the sense of I have to laugh to keep from crying in these lyrics. In my personal experience, I had a friend in middle school and high school who used to tell hilarious stories about his insanely strict father. I assumed the whole thing was a joke until years later when I learned what a nightmare the poor guy's home life had actually been. I think the same is probably true here. Brian and his brothers will perform the song in the Beach Boys 1976 NBC TV special, complete with Brian coughing in the middle, which actually helps because they all relax after that, especially Brian. Emphasizing the autobiographical nature of the song, the special cuts to Dennis's memories of singing with his brothers in the back seat of Murray's car. To date, most Beach Boys albums have ended with a throwaway. They generally seem to have sequenced their sides to start with the strongest track and move toward the weakest, which was a common practice in the early 60s. Of course, their most recent, Beach Boys Today, had ended jarringly with Bull Session with the Big Daddy after the beautiful song sequence that made up the rest of the side. In sharp contrast, And Your Dream Comes True is a beautiful tag to end the album. Coming in at just over 1 minute, it's by far the shortest track on the album too. Bruce recalled that he was at the session, but rather than sing on it, Brian made him unofficial producer, and that it was a challenge because he had never worked with a cappella voices before. You can certainly hear that it's Bruce in the control room in the session excerpt when they were still calling it Wish That He Could Stay, included in the Hawthorne, California collection released in 2001. Of course, it's a beautiful showcase for the group's vocals and feels like a lullaby saying goodnight to the listeners. I think it shows a growth in confidence that they're willing to end the album this way. Prior to this, I got the feeling that they didn't like to end on a serious note, whether they thought that would come off as pretentious or just risk leaving the listeners feeling a little melancholy or some combination of that, I'm not sure. Reportedly, it's based on a composition that Brian copyrighted on July 7th, 1963, called Ba Ba Black Sheep. And knowing that, it's easy to see the resemblance between this and the English nursery rhyme. Alan also recalled that the Beach Boys used to sometimes warm up by singing that nursery rhyme in harmony. We'll hear it again on a Beach Boys record when somebody, maybe Dean Torrance, ad-libs a little, "Ba ba black sheep, have you any wool?" in the intro to Barbara Ann on the Party album later in the year. Of course, the lyrical theme of wanting to stay together that ends this album is one that will be returned to in the opening track of their next regular album with Wouldn't It Be Nice. Summer Days and Summer Nights will reach number 2 the week of September 4th, behind Out of Our Heads by the Rolling Stones. It was an improvement over their last album, Beach Boys Today, which reached number 4. The Surfin' USA album had also hit number 2 back in 1963. Only Beach Boys Concert had gone to number 1. It has to be admitted that maybe Capitol was right in wanting to return to teen-oriented material in the summer of '65. I'm sure they saw it that way when the album went to number 2. While its chart placement makes it more successful than Beach Boys Today or their next regular studio album, Pet Sounds, Summer Days and Summer Nights is historically less revered than either of those two albums. Some of it may be Brian's admitted attempt to placate Capitol by returning to more teen-friendly subject matter. Also, where Today in part represented a triumph of track sequencing, I've always thought Summer Days and Summer Nights represented a notable failure of track sequencing. The Girl from New York City and Amusement Parks USA opened the album with a clear statement that this is going to be an upbeat, teen-friendly record, but I don't think it was really the best choice. Of course, you can always play What If with the sequencing on any Beach Boys album, but more than any of their other albums, I think the final lineup weakens the overall effect. There are a lot of better possible sequences. I think the impression the album makes and its later reputation would have been greatly improved by moving the first 2 tracks to the end of side 1, opening the album instead with California Girls and Girl Don't Tell Me, and moving the other single A side, Help Me Rhonda, to the beginning of side 2. Looking back from a modern perspective, Summer Days and Summer Nights seems to be viewed sometimes as a detour on the creative path from the second side of Today to the grandeur of Pet Sounds, a detour through Amusement Parks USA and Salt Lake City. It might not have quite the reputation of Beach Boys Today or Pet Sounds, but very few records do when compared to those albums. If the sum of its parts is not quite what it might have been, some of those parts are absolutely outstanding and some of the greatest records ever made. Of course, Capitol's response to the success will be to pressure Brian for another album for the fourth quarter. After cleverly coming up with the Beach Boys Party concept to give Capitol some material for the holidays of 1965 and to buy Brian some more time to create new material, he'll move away from the teen-oriented Summer Days with Pet Sounds. And of course, we'll discuss that when we come to 1966. I hope you enjoyed this. As always, I look forward to your feedback. I hope you will join me next week when we'll spend some time with The Monkey's Uncle. Till then, thanks for watching. Please hit like if you don't mind, subscribe if you haven't. Have a great week. Bye.